I think the real fear for me is that the plane's going to fall out of the sky, and that I'm really going to be leaving my family behind.
I think the worst thing about flying for me is the fear of not being in control, of other people not actually doing their jobs properly.
I feel so nervous. I'm always watching my clock. I'm always looking out the window if I've got a window seat. I'm asking the hostesses, have we got long to go? And
I just know that when I go to the airport and see people off, I'm very glad to be driving back home again.
My biggest concern with flying is the entire trip, from planning it, to the drive to the airport, to the ticketing, waiting for the flight to be called, the whole exercise, and I guess the relief at the other end when I get off.
It is less than 100 years ago that man's first attempts to fly were seen merely as pursuits of eccentrics. But from those early faltering steps, the aviation industry has taken great strides to become, for many people, an essential component of everyday life. Perhaps more than any other technological advance, the development of the aviation industry has opened up the world for both the recreational and business traveller.
For most people, flying is an efficient and enjoyable mode of transport. They recognise and appreciate the safety and comfort of air travel. However, a significant percentage of the population does not share this view of flying. Approximately 20% of the adult population have some apprehension about flying, which can range in intensity from mild unease in certain phases of flight through to downright terror. For a small percentage of these fearful flyers, their anxiety is so intense that they refuse to fly. But most fearful flyers continue to fly. But for them, flying is an ordeal to be endured rather than a pleasure. So what is it people so dislike about flying?
My basic feeling, I think, is claustrophobia. I believe, and I don't feel it as strong, but I believe that when I get into the plane, the door closes and it's like,
How does it actually get up in the air with all that weight? All the noises that go on, each one of them scares the living daylights out of me.
You know how the wings flap up and down, and I just keep thinking they're going to fall off, or bits of the plane will just give way.
In simple terms, it'll fall out of the sky. We won't get off the ground, or we'll get halfway off the ground, or we'll be cruising along and the stone will fall.
A fear of flying can also stem from what is called a fear of fear, the fear of becoming anxious and what this might lead to. So what is actually happening to cause this intense discomfort? When an individual is faced with a situation they perceive as threatening or dangerous, their body is mobilised to respond to this threat. This has been termed the fight or flight response, which is a complex series of reactions within the body triggered by an individual's perception of danger. For the fearful flyer, a sense of danger or impending doom can start well before a flight. This apprehension increases through the pre-flight procedures and often peaks as the aircraft door is closed, signalling that the flight is about to begin. By this stage, the fearful flyer may be feeling swamped by a range of intensely uncomfortable physical symptoms.
It's a queasy feeling, and it's an uneasiness and sweaty, and it's a mild anxiety attack, I guess.
I'm not actually frightened, more just very disoriented.
Nauseous and motion sickness are my main problems. Claustrophobic.
I feel nauseous, my heart starts palpitating, I get sweaty palms, lightheadedness, and a feeling that I'm going to die.
These reactions all stem from the autonomic nervous system, which controls aspects of human functioning such as heart rate, breathing, gastric activity, and sweating. The autonomic nervous system operates pretty much like the choke in your car. Just as the choke works to change the fuel mixture to get your car moving when it is cold, the autonomic nervous system also works by changing the fuel mixture in your body to get you moving in certain circumstances. Most of us have experienced the sensations that go with this activation of the autonomic nervous system. The nervousness we experience prior to an exam or before giving a speech in public is similar in nature, although less intense than the anxiety experienced by the fearful flyer. But in all these different circumstances, the body is essentially being placed on an emergency footing or red alert, with a surge of adrenaline leading to an accelerated heart rate, accelerated respiration rate, an increase in sweating and gastric activity.
It's important to recognise that these symptoms of anxiety come about because we think we are under threat. It is these thoughts which trigger the physical arousal. But occasionally we get it wrong and see a situation as dangerous or threatening when in fact there is no cause for concern. If we are at home at night and hear a loud noise outside,
What's that?
we may think this noise indicates some degree of threat, and we may experience a sudden surge of anxiety as a consequence. Thumping heart, sweaty palms, and so on. But if we steel ourselves to venture outside to investigate,
Only the cat.
and find it was the cat knocking over a pot plant, the anxiety quickly disappears as we realise that there is no threat. We have raised a false alarm.
in much the same way it can be argued that the anxiety experienced by the fearful flyer comes about because flying is perceived as dangerous or threatening. But are these perceptions well founded? Does flying pose a real threat? Is the anxiety experienced by the fearful flyer based on a perception of threat which is accurate or greatly exaggerated? What are the facts related to air travel? Who better to ask than one of the people who flies the kind of aircraft you may be travelling on? Captain Adrian Lambourne is an airline pilot with over 30 years' experience in aviation.
As an airline pilot, I'm well aware that not everyone is comfortable about flying. As a family man who enjoys life, I'm no risk taker. If flying was a dangerous activity, I'd be looking for another job. Flying on commercial jet aircraft is an extremely safe form of transport. In Australia, the major commercial airlines have an outstanding safety record extending over more than 25 years.
In that time, Ansett Australia and Qantas have not had a single fatality. No wonder it's been suggested that the most dangerous aspect of air travel is that drive to the airport. And it's not just airlines in Australia who can boast the highest standards of safety. The major airlines flying around the world have safety records comparable to those enjoyed by air travellers in Australia. Yet despite this excellent safety record, we know that many passengers are apprehensive about flying. It might help if I can give you an understanding of what makes an aircraft fly. It seems amazing, doesn't it, that something that weighs many tons can fly like a bird. But that is exactly what happens. We've learned well from watching what happens to birds in flight, and the same principles of aerodynamics apply to a bird, a child's balsa wood aeroplane, or a jumbo jet. The concept of flying is based around achieving sufficient speed to force air over the wings in a way that stretches this air, creating a low-pressure area above the wing. This produces an effect which is essentially the same as suction, and the aircraft is drawn upwards into this area of low pressure and lifts off the ground. For each flight, careful calculations are made to determine the speed required to create sufficient lift to get the weight of the aircraft off the ground. So, given that the aerodynamics are in place to get the aeroplane flying, what is it that worries a fearful flyer at takeoff?
Well, I've never actually understood the principles of why it happens, how it gets up, how it stays up, and particularly all the noises on the way up. Never understood what they were.
As the aeroplane is going up, what's going to stop it from coming back down?
My main concern about takeoff, again, is that the plane just isn't going to make it and that it's actually going to crash.
We start accelerating and I look out and I think, how is this going to get off the ground? Where are we going? And then we start to take off and it's like, you go, okay, come on, come on, come on. You start leaning forward in your seat to take off with it and you think, how are we going to get up there?
Okay, let me take you through a flight so that I can address your concerns. My first job when I arrive at work is to plan for the trip. Oh, thanks, Randall. Yeah, cheers. So this means checking the weather forecast, calculating how much fuel we need, and going through various pre-flight checks to ensure that the aircraft is ready for operation. My colleagues in the load control section have calculated the weight of the aircraft, and with this in mind, we work out how much fuel we need for the journey. We always carry more than the minimum requirement, so that if our flight plan was altered, we would have plenty of fuel for these changes. Our flight planning includes a study of the weather conditions so that we can plan a flight that will give you the most comfortable ride possible. I know many passengers feel concerned when we encounter turbulence in flight, so let's take a moment to discuss this important topic. In most instances, turbulence occurs because the air through which we fly is moving around. It can move up and down in waves, just like water in the ocean. Alternatively, different masses of air can come together in much the same way that different parts of a river converge, causing the merging streams to become choppy. Turbulence is much the same as travelling in a car on a gravel road. In both instances, the ride may not be very smooth, but there is no threat to your safety. And that is the key point. Turbulence can be uncomfortable, but it is not dangerous.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. Just running into a little bit of turbulence at the moment, so I've put the seatbelt sign on.
It does not make the aircraft difficult to fly, and the aircraft is built to withstand forces far greater than anything we find in such weather conditions. As we get more sophisticated in our weather forecasting, we become more able to see where the bad weather might be along the way. Thunderstorm activity shows up clearly in red on the radar, which allows us to plot a course around the storms. This all contributes to our efforts to make your journey as comfortable as possible. After we've done our flight planning, we head out to the aircraft. The engineers who have checked over the aircraft have signed the maintenance log to tell me that everything is in peak working order. But even so, I check carefully both outside the aircraft and when we board to be sure that everything is as it should be. Pilots everywhere do this for all types of aircraft. It's standard practice around the world. By this stage, you'll be completing your own pre-flight procedures. Your bags have been checked in and you've been issued a boarding pass. As you are directed to your seat, I'll be working with my first officer to complete a detailed pre-flight routine that ensures everything is in place for takeoff.
On pressure check. Melbourne ground, good morning. Juliet X-ray.
We've established contact with air traffic control, who remain in close communication with us as we prepare for takeoff. Either the traffic officer or one of the cabin crew will tell us when you're all aboard. The doors are then locked and we're pushed back from the airport terminal. When all our checks are completed, we tell air traffic control that we're ready for takeoff. Our takeoff clearance may be given immediately, or we may be told to wait for other aircraft. But once we get our clearance, we increase engine power and accelerate for takeoff. As the speed increases, we monitor the instruments until we reach our takeoff speed. At this point, a simple rearward movement of the controls flies the aircraft off the ground and we begin to climb. It may sound like the engines are working hard, and they are, but on most takeoffs, we have more power available than we need, and the engines are always working well within their capacity. Many people with a fear of flying are concerned about the possibility of engine failure. But the reality is that modern jet engines are so reliable that engine failure is virtually unheard of. Most pilots can expect to finish their careers without ever experiencing such an event. However, if we were to lose power in an engine, the aircraft will still fly, as the power available from the remaining engine or engines is well in excess of what is required just to keep the aircraft flying. In fact, soon after takeoff, you'll hear the engine noise change as we reduce to climb power, and again at top of climb as we reduce to cruise power. After we're airborne, you'll hear a series of clunks from beneath the floor as the wheels are retracted into the fuselage. On some aircraft, you may hear other noises. For example, a whirring noise probably means the flaps or slats on the wing are retracting to reshape the wing from takeoff to climb and cruise configuration. Once in the air, we'll need to turn the aircraft towards our destination. There's no chance of the aircraft tipping over as we limit the angle of bank to 30 degrees. So it's a very gentle turn, but it can still feel a little unnerving if you're not an experienced flyer. For many people, once we reach cruising altitude, the most difficult part of the flight is behind them. But for others, their major concern is experiencing turbulence in flight. One advantage of modern jet aircraft is that we can fly above most of the turbulent air. You get very little sensation of speed, even though you may be travelling at around 850 kilometres per hour. This means that you can settle back, read a book, or watch the movie and enjoy a meal with a glass of wine. There are strict rules relating to the consumption of alcohol by pilots in Australia. There must be at least 8 hours from bottle to throttle, or in other words, we cannot consume any alcohol in the 8 hours prior to a flight. These regulations are strictly observed, and it may interest you to know that this attention to detail even extends to what we eat in flight. To guard against the remote possibility of food poisoning, most airlines adopt a policy that the two pilots should not eat the same meal, just in case one of the dishes might be contaminated. Okay, so you've had a meal and perhaps had a drink and watched a movie. It's now time to think about getting you back on the ground. About 20 to 30 minutes before our destination, you'll hear a change in aircraft noise, which means that we've started our descent. In the descent, we fly the aircraft much the same way you would drive your car down a steep hill. We need less throttle to maintain our speed, so we reduce the power, which is why it becomes quieter in the cabin. As we descend, we may fly through clouds or in air turbulence that can cause a few bumps. But once again, this is no cause for concern. We're now talking to air traffic control at our destination, and they give us our arrival instructions. At busy airports, we may be told to fly in a holding pattern, which means we're in a queue, and we have to wait our turn for other aircraft to clear the airport before we can land. This is a relatively normal procedure, and one that is built into our flight planning and fuel calculations. As we approach our destination, we may hear a range of noises. Noise from the flaps can be heard as we set the wing. As the landing gear is lowered, you'll probably hear 2 loud clunks as the wheels lock into place. And an increase in engine noise is normal as we make our final approach to land. And then we're down. We try to make the landing as gentle as possible, and most times it is. But aircraft vary, with some touching down very lightly, while others land with more of a thud. The braking systems also vary from aircraft to aircraft. But if you hear a loud noise at this point, it's probably the engines going to reverse thrust, which very effectively slows the aircraft so that we can taxi to the terminal. Now at this point, I suspect many of you are saying, well, okay, maybe the aircraft is well made and maintained. But what about the human factors? Are all pilots capable? What if they're sick, tired, stressed, or just having a bad day? Well, it will reassure you to know that pilots are carefully selected, highly trained, and continuously monitored and checked throughout their careers. The major commercial airlines are able to carefully pick the best applicants from the many who seek a career as an airline pilot. Successful applicants are selected on the basis of their experience, their flying ability, and various psychological characteristics are considered, such as ability to function under pressure, personal reliability, and maturity. Those who survive the screening process and are selected by the airline then go back into training, which includes intensive classroom preparation, sessions in the flight simulator, and training flights without passengers. The training and monitoring of pilots is not something that ends with their initial induction. Every 3 months, pilots spend a session in the flight simulator. It's a multi-million-dollar high-tech device capable of accurately reproducing the types of scenarios a pilot may face during the course of a flight. Although many of these scenarios, such as an engine failure, are extremely rare, the simulator provides an invaluable opportunity for pilots to practice what they would be required to do should that happen in flight.
Charlie Zulu Alpha is climbing to 3,000, we've left 1,400.
This monitoring extends to medical fitness. Pilots undergo a full medical examination every 12 months in the early part of their career, and then every 6 months as they get older, to make sure they remain medically fit to operate the aircraft. There are also strict laws that limit the number of hours a pilot can work in a day, or across a week or a month. Mandatory rest periods are stipulated to ensure that a pilot's performance is not compromised by fatigue. Considerable attention is devoted to developing flight deck procedures, which ensure that the pilots work together as a team to minimize the chance of error. Flight procedures are clearly set out, and pilots follow standardized routines, with each pilot providing a check on the operation of their colleague. In addition, mechanical warnings are built into the instrumentation, in much the same way that a warning light may remain on in your car if your seatbelt remains unfastened. So, this combination of strictly established procedures and human and mechanical cross-checking works very effectively to maximize the reliability of pilot operations and decision-making. Air travel is now well established as a safe, comfortable and efficient means of transport. If I can be confident every time I step into an aircraft, then so can you.
So how can you use all this information to become more at ease about flying? I'm going to outline 5 steps that you need to take to change the way you think and feel about flying. Step 1. It is critical that you recognise that your fear of flying is coming from within you. Fear of flying is not a disease or an ailment over which you have no control. It's a consequence of the beliefs that you have held about flying, which have led you to significantly overestimate the dangers associated with air travel. Your thoughts about air travel are at the core of your fear. You must be prepared to work hard to change these beliefs, as only by doing so can you fundamentally change your experience of flying. Step 2. Having acknowledged that your beliefs are at the basis of your fear, you must now identify the core beliefs about flying which give rise to this concern. What are the threats you see in flying? What do you fear is going to happen when you take a flight? What are you worried about at takeoff? What is it that worries you when the plane is flying in turbulence? Be as specific as possible. Work to identify your particular concerns about flying and then write them down. Step 3. Once you've identified and listed your beliefs about the dangers associated with flying, you need to challenge the validity of these beliefs. Are they accurate or misleading? Is there evidence to support your beliefs? Look at each of the beliefs you've listed and ask the following questions. Firstly, what is the evidence for this belief? Secondly, what is the likelihood of this feared consequence actually occurring? For example, if you've believed that turbulence is dangerous because it may lead to the aircraft breaking apart or becoming impossible to fly, then challenge these beliefs by looking at the evidence. How many planes have fallen apart in turbulence? Is it difficult to fly an aircraft in turbulence? You now know that modern aircraft are built to withstand forces far greater than those encountered in turbulence. So even the most severe turbulence poses no threat to the integrity of the aircraft. And it is not difficult to fly an aircraft in turbulence. Turbulence may be uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. Remember, it's possible for human beings to raise false alarms in situations that are in fact not dangerous. This is almost certainly what you've been doing in developing a fear of flying. Step 4. Once you discover that your old beliefs are based on misconceptions that have led you to exaggerate the risks associated with flying, you will need to work hard to replace these old beliefs with the factually based information we have provided. For some of you, this may not be too difficult. Simply being armed with the facts will be enough to enable you to approach flying with more confidence. For others, you may have to work hard to replace your old faulty beliefs. You need to be on guard, as these old beliefs may be quite entrenched. Remember that if you find yourself feeling anxious about flying, this means you have lapsed back into your old ways of thinking. Use this as a signal to click onto the facts about flying rather than your old fallacies. Step 5. And finally, it's important that you practice and be persistent. You've had possibly many years developing your beliefs about flying. To change these beliefs from fallacy to fact can take some time, but it will happen if you persist. Don't be put off if you find your old fears re-emerging from time to time. Simply recognise this as your old habitual way of thinking about flying and work to focus your thoughts on what you now know about the exceptional safety record of air travel. So to summarise, follow the 5 steps. 1. Recognise that your fear comes from your beliefs about flying. 2. Identify your own beliefs about the dangers of flying. 3. Challenge these beliefs. Can they be supported by evidence? 4. Replace these misconceptions about flying with the facts. And 5. Practice to change your thinking from fallacy to fact.
Since I completed the course, flying is really a joy. I've traveled some 30 flights, I guess, including a family holiday. It's been fantastic.
I've done 6 actual flights now, and they keep getting better and better.
Last December, I took off to Paris and to Prague and had the wonderful holiday. It was quite magic.
Flying is actually very enjoyable now. I took a long trip just after the fear of flying class back to Europe, and that consisted of about 2 or 3 up and downs, which was no problem. And the flight generally was just great.
Once I actually sat down in the plane, I was very comfortable. I didn't have any problems. I wasn't worried about the noises. I fell asleep. I was quite happy landing and taking off. It was great.
As you can see, many people have overcome their fear of flying. You can too.